The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Russel Norman.
Co-leader of the Greens, Mr. Russel Norman. Good morning, Russell.
Morning, Wammo.
Well, last night, under urgency, the government's Canterbury Earthquake Response and Recovery Bill was passed into law. However, there are concerns about this particular law from not only ACT, but also the Greens as well, over the sweeping powers that it gives ministers. But the Greens did vote for it, Russell.
Yeah, that's right. At the end of the day, we moved a whole pile of amendments to try to improve it, and we made some marginal improvements to it. So then we had to make a decision about whether to support it or not, and we decided that we would, based on some of the reassurances we got from the government. It's not a good way to run legislation.
What kind of powers does it actually give, first of all?
Well, what it does is it gives ministers the ability to make these regulations called order in councils, which basically are written by a minister and rubber stamped by the Governor-General, to vary pretty much every piece of law on the books, with the exception of 5 of the constitutional pieces of law. They can vary them in order to do the rebuilding in Canterbury.
Okay. And the powers are going to stay in place until when?
They're going to be there till April 2012. We moved an amendment to get them to be just 6 months, and they could be rolled over for 6 months at a time, but it would come back to Parliament. Just if you're going to give the executive these extraordinary powers, then you want to keep them on a pretty short leash, but unfortunately Labor and National voted against that. So, yeah, they're there till April 2012.
And are they absolutely confined just to the Canterbury region?
No, they apply nationally, but they've got to be for the purpose of doing the rebuilding in Canterbury or Christchurch. So they're for the purpose of what's going on in Canterbury, but the laws themselves can be altered elsewhere. For example, if the Kaikoura coast, they wanted to rapidly clear the road and needed to do some variation to the laws around it, they could do that.
Okay. Of course, all laws can be used in all kinds of ways. So what is your biggest concern about how the law could be misused?
Well, it is standard. I mean, it is our constitution. In fact, our constitutional framework is that we have these elected MPs, and they get to pass the laws, and then the executive or the cabinet or the government, that they get to, implement things, and they get to, spend the money and so forth. But they can't just make up laws. So the problem is that this gives the executive the ability, effectively, to vary the law or to make up laws on a whim for the purposes of the rebuilding. Now, we were willing to, give some leeway for that, but we're pretty concerned about the extent of it. We also tried, for example, to ensure that any of these ordering councils must be published within 24 hours and presented to the next sitting day of Parliament. Because, of course, they're effectively making law, so it'd be good to make it easily accessible. So there are real concerns about the constitutionality of it. The government says it's all for the good, and we'll just have to keep a really close eye on it.
But is it actually needed at all? Do we need these urgent laws to rebuild Christchurch, or can it just be done without all these laws?
There's the original idea that the government had, which I think was a better one, was to actually identify particular sections of particular acts which might need to be varied. So to speed up the consenting process for, rebuilding houses, for example, or fixing houses, identify the particular clauses in the RMA that might need to be tweaked to do that. And that made a lot of sense to us. So there's no need for the breadth that they've done. They've given themselves the ability to change any act in the country except 5. We didn't think that they needed to give themselves the power. So we said it should only be the actual laws that they've named in the piece of legislation we passed last night, but they want to be able to change any law they like.
But also, did the Greens only vote for it because you don't want to be seen as the bad guys who aren't helping out Canterbury?
We voted for it because we want the people of Canterbury to know that everyone in Parliament's behind them. And so, this legislation was going through, and we tried to amend it. We got some reassurances, and then we said, we did agonise about it. And we said, okay, we want to make sure that, we give people of Canterbury know that the Greens and everyone else is behind them. but it's far from ideal, there's no question about that.
Because there's some big issues in Canterbury that are still there that existed before the earthquake, like water quality and water access. Could this urgent law that's just been passed allow free-range access to the water of Canterbury, potentially? Just as an example.
I don't think so. So the government previously passed the ECAN Act, which basically got rid of democracy in Canterbury for the regional council. They abolished elections. And it also meant the government could vary water conservation orders, which are like national parks for rivers. Obviously, with that history, we were pretty leery of what they're up to. But the purposes of the act that was passed last night, everything has to be connected to the reconstruction. So it would take a pretty long stretch for them to use it to accelerate their irrigation dreams or nightmares. And so I don't think it can be used for that.
Okay. Jerry Brownlee's in charge. Do you trust him?
I trust that he's got good intent. I think Jerry means well on this issue, on the earthquake stuff. I mean, obviously his handling of the mining issue was a bit bumbling, frankly. So we'll see how he goes, but I certainly wish him well because we all want it to work out well.
It's interesting, from mining as in deconstruction to reconstruction, one extreme to the other.
I just hope he pays a bit more attention to detail in this situation than he did with the mining, where he often lacked attention to detail.
It was all worked out on the back of an envelope, wasn't it?
It seemed to be made up as they went along.
Yeah. Hey, thanks very much, Russell. Cheers for your time.
Okay, thanks very much.
Co-leader of the Greens, Russel Norman.